My name is Liesel Hartmann. I am 32 years old, and I built a commercial interior design consultancy from the ground up in Toronto, Ontario, without a dollar of family money, without a co-signed loan, without a single phone call asking my father to pull a favor with someone he knew. I built it in one of the most expensive real estate markets in the country, where nobody hands you a contract without checking your portfolio, your references, and your credit history twice over. I built it on late evenings after my day job, on a NCIDQ certification exam. I failed the first time, and passed the second by 4 points, and on a belief that the quality of my work would eventually carry more weight than the connections I did not have. My family spent those years telling me I was chasing something impractical. That design was not a serious industry, that I should find a stable position with benefits and let the ambition go. Before I tell you what happened, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your city in the comments, and if you have ever built something real, while the people closest to you stood on the sidelines, predicting when you would fail. Hit that like button right now. Because what happened in my boardroom on a cold October morning is the reason I am here, and I need you to hear every part of it. It started on a Tuesday. My firm, Hartmann Studio, had been running for 6 years at that point. We specialized in commercial workspace design. Law firms, financial offices, techs, companies that had outgrown their startup aesthetic and needed environments that communicated something more substantial. I was sitting in my boardroom on the 14th floor of a building on King Street West, across from the managing partner and senior associate of Reynolds & Croft LLP, a well-regarded Bay Street firm that had occupied the same tired floors for 11 years and had finally committed to a move into purpose-built space. The redesign contract was worth $1.8 million. My team had spent 3 months preparing the proposal. The air in the room smelled like fresh espresso, and something that felt, genuinely, like the beginning of a different kind of chapter. I was reaching across the table to hand the managing partner the signature page when the frosted glass door to my boardroom opened so hard. It caught the door stop and swung back. My brother walked in first. He was 29 and had spent the better part of 5 years moving between positions. He called opportunities, and other people called positions he left before the ink was dry on his contracts. Behind him came my father wearing a blazer that did not belong to him. The shoulders sat wrong, and behind him, moving with the slow, deliberate pace of a woman who expects her arrival to carry weight, came my mother. I had not spoken to any of them in 16 months. The managing partner half rose from his chair. His associate set her pen down and watched. I had spent years learning how to stay very still under pressure. I stayed still. "This is a closed client meeting," I said, looking directly at my father. I used no titles. I kept nothing warm in my voice because there was nothing warm available. "You need to leave." My father did not look at the lawyers. He walked around to my side of the table and placed a manila folder on top of the signature pages with the deliberateness of someone who has been rehearsing the gesture for days. "We are handling this today," he said. "Open it." I did not open it. My brother dropped into one of my client chairs, without being invited, crossed an ankle over his knee, and looked around the room the way people do, when they are already mentally rearranging what does not belong to them. My mother stood near the doorway with her arms folded, wearing the expression she reserved for situations she considered beneath her, which had always been most situations. "That is a transfer agreement," my father announced, loud enough that both lawyers heard him clearly. "You are signing 45% of this firm over to your brother and naming him co-director. He has the vision and the connections to take this company where it needs to go. You have done the hard work on your own. Now let the family benefit from what you have built." The boardroom was silent, except for the low sound of King Street, traffic 14 floors below. "The hard work," I repeated. "You heard your father," my mother said from the doorway. I looked at my brother. He had found something to examine on the back of his hand. I closed the folder without reading a word of it. "You just walked into a confidential client meeting," I said, keeping my voice exactly level. "You interrupted that meeting to present me with a document demanding I hand 45% of a company I built entirely without your help, to a man whose longest, continuous stretch of employment in 5 years was approximately 7 months. And the justification you have offered is vision and connections." My father's jaw tightened. "Do not embarrass this family." "That window closed about 8 minutes ago," I said. The managing partner cleared his throat quietly. He had 2 daughters, one finishing law school at Osgood. I had researched both partners thoroughly before this meeting. He leaned back in his chair and watched my father with a careful assessing look of someone who has oftenly spent 30 years reading rooms professionally. My father decided the situation required escalation. He dropped his voice to the register that men use when they want to sound like a consequence. "You think this office is safe?" "I know the chair of the condominium corporation for this tower personally. We have known each other for 20 years. One call from me, and your occupancy agreement is under review by end of week. Start thinking about where you will be moving your things." My mother smiled faintly from the doorway. My brother finally looked up. I reached across the table and turned the boardroom speakerphone to face my father. "Call him," I said. My father blinked. "Call the condominium board chair right now. I will wait while you do it." He held for exactly 3 seconds. Then his confidence made the decision for him. He pulled out his phone, found the contact, and dialed, holding it up with a smile that did not extend past his mouth. The line rang twice. Someone answered. "Good morning, Meridian Property Management." "Gordon," my father said, using the first name with the ease of a man making a point. "It's Bernard. I need a word about a commercial unit in the King Street Tower. Suite 1408, a design firm." A brief pause. "Mr. Hartmann, good morning. Suite 1408, you said?" "That's right. I need to discuss a review of their occupancy." A longer pause followed this time. When the voice came back, it was careful. "Mr. Hartmann, I want to make sure I understand what you're asking. Suite 1408 is not a leased unit." My father's posture shifted by a degree or two. "What?" "That suite was purchased outright through a private acquisition 22 months ago. Hartmann Holdings Incorporated is registered as the sole owner on title. There is no lease to review. There is no lease. The firm you are referring to owns the unit. We work for them. Is there something else I can help you with today?" The line clicked off. What followed was the kind of silence that fills a room completely. Somewhere below us, a phone rang in an adjacent office. The managing partner exhaled slowly through his nose. My brother's ankle came off his knee. My father stared at his phone as though it had spoken to him in a language he did not know existed. I pushed back my chair, stood, and walked to the boardroom door. I opened it and held it. Building security was already positioned in the corridor. I had sent the message 4 minutes after my family walked through the door. My mother's composure went first. She stepped forward with both hands raised. "Liesel, you cannot treat us like this. We are your blood. You are on a property I own without an invitation," I said. "Please leave before I ask building management to file a formal incident report." She left. My brother left without making eye contact, moving with the quick, slightly lowered walk of someone trying not to be observed going. My father was last. He stopped in the doorway and looked back at me. The performance had gone entirely out of his voice. "You will regret how you handled this." "I own the building you just tried to have me removed from," I said. "I think we both know who made the larger error today." The door closed. I walked back to the table, sat down, and looked at both lawyers. "I am very sorry for that interruption. Shall we continue?" The managing partner uncapped his pen. "Mrs. Hartmann," he said, "any firm that handles an ambush like that with that level of composure is more than capable of handling our portfolio. Where would you like me to sign?" I should have known they would regroup. People who have never truly been told no tend to treat a setback as a temporary administrative problem, rather than a permanent answer. Within 48 hours, a coordinated campaign began across every professional platform my firm maintained. Anonymous reviews appeared on Who's, on Google Business, and on 2 industry forums, specific to commercial design in Ontario. They alleged that Hartmann Studio had violated BCIN registration protocols, misrepresented subcontractor qualifications to clients, and submitted falsified code compliance documentation on recent projects. A longer post appeared on a design industry LinkedIn group with close to 9,000 members, written with the precision of someone who understood exactly how professional liability concerns move through an industry built entirely on referral trust. The language was measured, clinically specific, and very carefully targeted. I recognized the method immediately. My sister-in-law was a communications consultant. She had spent 6 years building a reputation on turning complex situations into focused messages that moved through professional networks with efficiency and without fingerprints. My brother had gone home from my boardroom and handed her a version of events that bore almost no resemblance to what had actually occurred. And she, believing him, had done what she was very good at doing. The posts were tagged to Hartmann Studios' professional profiles. They were positioned to surface in the feeds of every developer, architect, and corporate client I had spent 6 years cultivating. My phone was ringing before 8 in the morning. A commercial developer I worked with regularly in Mississauga asked careful questions. A city planning contact sent a diplomatically worded message. A senior associate at one of my longer-term client firms requested a call to discuss some things she had seen circulating online. I answered every single one the same way. Our compliance documentation and completed project records are available for any review you would like to conduct. I welcome it. I did not issue a public response. I did not post a rebuttal. My sister-in-law was skilled enough that any visible reaction from me would become new material for the next round, and I refused to provide her with anything to work with. But while I was managing the reputational side with steady hands, my father was working a separate approach entirely. He had spent 35 years building a professional social life inside the networks of Toronto's established business community. The kind built at golf clubs in Rosedale, at charity galas for hospital foundations, at the sort of dinners where business cards change hands over coffee, and someone always knows someone useful. He used every connection methodically. He told a contractor I had worked with for 4 years that my firm was under active review by ARIDO, the Association of Registered Interior Designers of Ontario. He told a project manager, who regularly referred work to me, that I had submitted falsified compliance documents to win a recent tender. He positioned himself at every turn as a reluctant father, a man who had tried to intervene privately before he was forced to say something publicly, heartbroken, and left with no choice but to speak. Within the same week, 2 accounts I had held for years sent formal termination notices, legal emails with no preceding phone call, no offered meeting, just termination clauses activated and file transfer requests attached. I pulled up my quarterly revenue projection and let the number settle in my chest like a stone. 11% of our operating income. My studio manager came to my doorway with printed reports in hands that were not quite steady. I asked her to come in and close the door. They will make mistakes, I said. People running on ego and urgency always do. Our job right now is to stay solid and stay patient. She nodded, though I could see she was not entirely convinced. What she did not know, what my family did not know, was that my father had already committed the error that would cost him everything. In his campaign to position my brother as the rightful head of a competing firm, he had been making promises to prospective clients that neither of them was remotely qualified to deliver. Development permit navigation, off-market commercial opportunities, expedited access to city planning contacts, promises assembled entirely from borrowed confidence, and nothing underneath. I knew this, because one of those prospective clients called me directly. A property management group based in Etobicoke had been approached by my father, with assurances of permit facilitation for a conversion project in a competitive Toronto corridor. The company's operations lead called my personal line, confused, because the man who had contacted her representing what he described as a premier development group could not answer basic questions about zoning classification under the City of Toronto's official plan. She had searched the name and found Hartmann Studio instead. I thanked her. I told her I would be in touch. Then I opened a file I had been keeping in an encrypted folder for exactly the right moment. 3 weeks earlier, a referral had arrived through an indirect channel, the kind that reaches you through a contact of a contact, with enough distance to be deniable. A developer named Randolph was seeking consulting support for a large mixed-use acquisition involving international capital. The preliminary retainer figures in the brief were extraordinary enough to make you read the page twice, and I had done what I always do when something arrives with that kind of weight behind it. I ran a thorough background investigation before agreeing to any meeting. What I found stopped me entirely. Randolph was not a developer in any meaningful sense. He was an experienced fraudster currently under active investigation by the RCMP Commercial Crime Section for investment fraud and deliberate transaction structuring designed to avoid FINTRAC reporting thresholds. FINTRAC, the Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Centre of Canada, monitors financial activity for indicators of money laundering and organized financial crime. Randolph's operation had been built around moving capital through layers of apparently legitimate business arrangements, calibrated to avoid triggering mandatory reporting requirements. The RCMP had been building their case for 14 months. Any firm that agreed to facilitate the consulting structure he was proposing would be walking directly to conspiracy's charge under the criminal code. I declined the referral the same afternoon. I finished reading the background file. I secured everything in encrypted storage and said nothing about it to anyone. Now I looked at that file with different eyes. My father needed a trophy client. He had publicly committed to a narrative about my brother's superior ability, and he needed something with enough apparent scale to make the story credible. He had spent the past several weeks demonstrating, very clearly, that he moved fast on opportunities, and that due diligence was not a process he had time for. I printed 3 pages from the Randolph file, the retainer summary, the project scope overview, the preliminary figures. I left them partially visible on my desk during a window of time when I knew my project coordinator would be alone in the studio to retrieve some documents. She had been quietly relaying my calendar and client activity to my father for 5 weeks. I had known for 3 of those weeks, and chosen to say nothing. A leak you have identified and decided to leave open is simply a channel you control. I made sure she overheard me mention To no one in particular, that I was working out how to protect the Randolph engagement given our current operating pressures. She had photographed the pages and transmitted them before she reached the elevator bank. I gave my father 48 hours. He called Randolph on the second day. I was not at the dinner. I received the full account later through federal disclosure documents. My father had reserved a private dining room at Canoe, 54 floors above Bay Street in the TD Bank Tower, because my father has always understood that the setting is part of the message. He ordered well. He presented with confidence. He told Randolph that his daughter had been too cautious, too bound by conventional compliance, thinking to see what a relationship like this could become. He guaranteed that his firm could facilitate the capital movement without triggering FinTrack reporting requirements. My brother signed the consulting agreement across the table. 2 RCMP officers had been seated 12 feet away since before the first course arrived. The private dining room had been prepared that afternoon. I spent that evening on the back deck of my house in Leslieville, drinking tea, watching the orange glow of the Toronto skyline through the autumn haze. My studio account was still partially frozen from a fraudulent suspicious activity report my sister-in-law had filed with our bank. My Arido standing review was pending. 3 clients had gone quiet, but I was completely still because I knew what had happened 54 floors above Bay Street 2 hours earlier. The trap had closed. They simply had not heard it yet. What happened next was not something I had planned. It was in many ways the more important part of the story. I sent my sister-in-law a single email containing loan documents I had obtained through a contact in financial records. The documents showed that my brother had forged her signature on a Canada Small Business Financing Program loan for $165,000 and a business line of credit for $90,000 at RBC. She was named as the sole personals guarantor on both. He had done it while she was away on a client engagement in Vancouver. He had used her home office printer, her professional letterhead, and a notary contact she had trusted for years. She did not call me back immediately. She called her lawyer. Then she called me. Her voice on the phone was quiet in the specific way that belongs only to people who are very deeply furious and have decided not to show it until they are ready to act. She had spent the previous 2 hours pulling her own financial records. She found the loan confirmations. She found the routing details. She found an email chain between my brother and my father, mapping out how to use her professional contacts. Contacts she had spent a decade building to amplify and legitimize the smear campaign against me, treating her network as a resource to be borrowed without her knowledge or consent. She had spent weeks waging a war on behalf of a man who was quietly taking apart her financial security to fund a business he had no qualifications to run and no plan to repay. "What do you need from me?" she said, when the silence had gone on long enough. "Document everything," I told her. "Protect yourself first. After that, I need the truth, all of it." She came to my studio 2 days later carrying a folder she held the way you carry evidence, because it was. We sat across from each other at the same boardroom table where my family had staged their ambush 6 earlier. The hostility between us had been replaced by something colder and more useful. Clarity. "I wrote those posts about your firm," she said. Her voice did not waver. "I want to issue a full formal correction, with my name attached to it." "I know," I said, "and I want you to. But do it on your own terms, in your own words when you are ready. Your credibility matters and it is worth protecting." She looked at me for a long moment. "Why are you helping me?" "Because they used both of us," I said, "and because you are not my actual problem." The arrests happened on a Thursday morning. RCMP Commercial Crime Section officers arrived at the offices of JB Commercial Partners, the name my father had registered with the Ontario Business Registry for my brother's competing firm, at 9:22 in the morning. They arrived with warrants and moved through the space with the quiet efficiency of people for whom this is not a remarkable occasion. My father was taken into custody in the reception area, in front of 2 administrative staff he had hired the previous month. My brother had apparently seen the officers step off the elevator. By the time they reached his floor, he had already moved toward the parking structure. They found him on the 2nd level. The charges included conspiracy to commit fraud over $5,000, facilitation of financial transactions, structured to avoid FinTrack reporting requirements, and submission of forged court documents. The last charge related to a falsified production order they had attempted to use to compel access to Hartmann Studios' client financial records. My sister-in-law's attorney filed for divorce that same afternoon. That evening she published her correction statement. It named the campaign, described precisely how it had been constructed and the false information she had been given, and formally retracted every post and review by name. She wrote it herself, in her own voice, and she did not soften a single factual detail. The statement moved through the same professional networks in which the original posts had circulated, and it moved considerably faster. By the end of the week, 2 of the clients who had gone quiet called to re-engage. A third followed 10 days later. 8 months after that, I was standing on the rooftop terrace of the King Street building. On a clear, October evening, the kind that Toronto produces a handful of times each autumn, when the air is sharp and the lake is close enough to feel in it. My sister-in-law stood beside me. She had joined Hartmann Studio as Director of Communications and Brand Strategy. 3 months after her divorce was finalized, bringing with her a professional network she had spent a decade building, and a reputation for integrity that had survived the storm, because she had walked into it directly, rather than away from it. She handed me a glass of wine and looked out at the skyline without speaking for a moment. "He called the studio last week," she said, meaning my brother. "He wanted me to write him a professional reference." "What did you say?" "I had his number permanently blocked across every channel we operate," she said. "And then I booked a table somewhere nice and went." I raised my glass. She raised hers. Below us the city moved with its usual relentless momentum, all glass and concrete and people with somewhere urgent to be. Up here the air was clear and the view was entirely ours. "To everyone who told us the room wasn't ours," I said. She smiled. It was the smile of someone who had walked straight into a fire and come out the other side, with a much clearer understanding of who had actually been standing beside her. "And to what that lesson cost them," she replied. The glasses met with a clean, bright sound that carried out over the rooftop and dissolved into the cool Toronto night. What I carry from all of this is not satisfaction about what happened to them. I do not have time for satisfaction as a destination. What I carry is a principle I could have told you before any of this happened, but that I understand now in my bones rather than just in my head. When you build something real, with your own time, and your own risks, and your own years of work, no one can take it from you by arriving one day and announcing they deserve a portion of it. They would have to match what you built. And people who have spent their lives expecting access to what others have made never develop the capacity to build anything themselves. Protect your work. Keep records of everything. Know exactly who has access to your trust, and understand the difference between loyalty that is freely given and obligation that someone has assumed on your behalf without asking. You owe your success to every night you stayed when you could have stopped, and every risk you took when no one believed it would pay off. You do not owe it to the people who arrived after the work was done and assumed the invitation extended to them. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this if it reached something real in your life. And I will see you in the next one.